Well, I actually grew up here. I grew up in Minnesota. I grew up just 3/4 of a mile from where we are right now. And I left when I finished high school because um, pretty much young people were urged to leave. And I think the reason we were all urged to leave is because the thought of living in the city seems like an easier life. One of the main problems with living in the country is that you come to understand that you're not in control. This particular moment where we have this intense heat and drought that just is going on and on is a perfect example. It's the crops are firing. The corn is, if we don't get rain very shortly, the corn's going to fire, as they say, which means it's going to not produce. It's going to die. The soybeans won't mature. And for those of us who are raising table food crops, it's just very difficult to get a crop at all this year. The strawberries were small and misshapen. The raspberries are not forming up. The garlic went down a month early and it is much smaller than normal. And you can do absolutely everything that you know to make things work, but you're not in control. You cannot control any of the big factors when you are living in the country. And I think that's one of the reasons that those of us who were born after World War II, our parents really felt that if we went to the city and got an education, we could get a more controlled life. But of course, that's an illusion. And I left and went to school and was a Vista volunteer and traveled a bit and moved to the West Coast and had a couple businesses there. But my heart longed to be back in the country. And then when my parents were getting very old, I cut a deal with my dad that I would come back and help with whichever parent survived if he'd let me live in this beat up old house. And so he died first, and he in fact gave me this house with a little bit of land. And so I came back and helped with my mom as best I could. And while it's isolated and my social group is too small and there are problems of that sort, I totally love it here. And I really don't regret this decision at all. I like it here. So that's how I arrived here. Why I do what I do? Well, what I am doing is I am a believer in sustainability. I am a believer in ecology, that it is very important that people eat food like other creatures that is raised as close as possible to where they live. We're a member of a community here. In my case, I'm a member of this community of soil, this community of animals, this community of plants. The more I build myself out of the other members of this community, the better I will fit in here and the healthier I will be. This is what I believe. And so I'm here, I study diligently, and I am building the soil life as best I can. I'm saving water and using the groundwater as little as I can. I'm trying to be sustainable. I'm trying not to waste. And I'm also trying to build a food community here in this neighborhood of so many miles around here. That's what I'm doing.
Can you tell us a little bit about your studies?
My studies. Well, as a beginning college student, I studied sociology and psychology and criminology, a lot of social science, and got a degree in psychology. Then I became a Vista volunteer and worked in the civil rights movement. I came back and I got a degree in education, and I taught for a few years. And then I moved to the West Coast and started seriously studying plants, started studying soils, and then when I came back here, I began studying for my doctorate in naturopathy, which I've completed now. But that is basically the study in deep ecology, how your body lives in its environment, and how you can make decisions to enhance the way your body develops, and your mind for that matter, and your spirit for that matter.
So, can you tell us something about what you've done on this land since you came?
Okay, what I've done on this land. Well, I have been learning. I grew up on a farm. I gardened a lot as a child, but then I left for many years, and coming back and learning this environment again has been a little bit like a beginner's world. What I'm doing is I seem to naturally accept that you build health from the soil up, and the quality of the plants that a soil produces is way down the food chain in plants. So if you want nutrient dense food, then you help the things that live in the soil to be vibrant and alive and very ample. So I compost constantly. I mulch heavily. I try not to water with groundwater. I try to use only rainwater. All of my fertilizing happens in the fall, and I don't use any fertilizers at all in the spring. In other words, I don't feed the plants that grow above the ground at all. I feed the plants and creatures that live in the soil, and I believe that that's the right way to do it. I know that my food tastes good, and I'm trying to be as self-sustaining as I can. So I raise not only fruits and vegetables, I'm also raising as much of my own meat as I can, and I try to treat all of my creatures with deepest respect. So this goes to that part about I've made a commitment as best I can not to eat prisoners. I believe that your body's built out of what you put in it, and that includes the energy of the food more than anything else. I mean, there's minerals and vitamins and proteins to worry about, but that all breaks down to energy. And so if you have happy critters that are providing your meat, that's the kind of energy you're taking in. If you have happy fruits and vegetables who are living in a supported environment without chemicals and stimulants, that's the kind of energy you're taking in. And theoretically, that should build your healthiest body. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, the meat is really intense food. So if you're a meat eater, if you purchase a cow or a pig that has been raised on pasture, having a life, running around, not imprisoned, that's the kind of energy you take in. If you eat meat that has been raised in confinement and is intensely packed together and is wishing to escape and is angry and frustrated with their life, then that's the kind of energy you take in. It's a serious concern for me. The cost is, of course, a serious factor, and a lot of people won't buy, for example, grass-fed beef or pasture pork because it's pricey. But whereas they can go to the grocery store and buy much less expensive pork or beef that was raised in confinement. But here's the key. If you look at the bodies of people who eat pasture pork and grass-fed beef, they tend to be leaner and more athletic. And my belief is that's because that's what they're taking in. Perhaps if you're eating food that costs a little, you'll eat a little less. Perhaps if you eat food that is raised to be nutrient dense, you'll be satisfied better and you won't be craving food so much. And your body will reflect the fact that you're eating nutrient dense rather than calorie dense food.
I guess when I was asking, I mean, you sort of started at the bottom, but there's a lot going on above the surface round about us here. The orchard, the ovens, the garlic operation. I don't think people will realize without a little bit of a tour just how much can be done on how many acres have you got here?
If you, well, I have 14 acres, but probably 5 of it is shelter belt, which is very necessary out here. We have amazing winds out here and extreme cold and weather conditions, so I like those. But I think probably I have 5 acres under tillage, and in 5 acres you can raise a great deal of food with rotations, you know, without repeating the same crop in the same spot. I have planted a pretty extensive shelter belt on the southwest corner because that's where I find the most damaging winds come from. And while it's growing, the trees, some of the trees are now up to about, I don't know, 8 feet or so. I have found that if I make planting beds in between the rows of trees. The trees are 20 feet apart, so there's plenty of space. So I go down the middle and I make this bed for strawberries, asparagus, tomatoes, whatever. The trees grow better. Now the trees are not getting more watered and they're not getting more, you know, additives in the fall or anything. But going down the center is this other species, this nurtured crop, and the trees get just by default get attention. You know, they get talked to, and the trees grow faster if I have a garden bed going down the middle. That's just kind of fun. But yes, I think that on 5 or 6 acres, you have all the work you can do. As a single person, probably as a couple. 5 or 6 acres. I know that people with more mechanization can handle more than that. But I like hands-on. I like being very intimate with my work, and so this is enough. And I love my fruit trees. I love my fruit trees. I find that I'm out there. You know, this spring after I made the clay oven, I learned about cob, you know, these different these different building materials that you make that are based on clay. And I was reading Michael Phillips' books about holistic orchard growing, and he says, well, you know, those tree trunks really appreciate a spa treatment. If you go out there in the spring, you mix some fresh cow manure and some clay from your land together, and you smear it on the trunks, the trees will thrive. So I did it this spring, and guess what? Despite this heat and this drought, my trees are thriving, and they still got their spa treatment on them. It's still heavy on them. I do spray the trees a lot. But I use no chemicals. I use fish emulsion, and I use neem oil for bugs, and I use a little kelp in the water, and a few effective enzymes to build what's happening on the leaves. The trees like that. And by building the immune system of the tree, I use nothing to kill anything. And I like that. That pleases me. I do pull thistles, I will admit that. I pull lots of thistles. That's part of the game.
You mentioned the project of building a food community here.
Yes.
Say a bit about that.
Well, you know how cultures are. They get going on a thought, and there's mendacity. Mendacity is such a good word, you know. This this concept that a whole lifestyle can be built on something that has marginal or no truth. It can be built on a lie. And we have that going here. We have this concept that farming can be done like a factory, that you can grow these fields of corn and soybeans almost as though it was hydroponics. You plant the corn, you feed it chemicals, you spray it, you kill everything you don't want, and you can usually, God willing, you get huge crops, and fortunately the farmers can make a great deal of money. But what is missing is that that isn't food they're growing. What they're growing is a commodity that will be altered very seriously and used as fuel and then fed in an artificial environment or processed into packaged foods that have very little nutrition left in them, unless artificial nutrition is added to it. At the same time, here we are in some of the richest farmland of the world, and it's hard to find table food. It is hard to find good, clean, natural, healthy, health-enhancing food. There are many people who have gardens, who have small gardens, raise a bunch of food for their own family. Many of those people in southwest Minnesota, which is like a 13 county area, there's probably 100 of those people who have surplus and who take it to farmers markets and sell it. And that's really good. And I'm glad, because those little tiny gardens that are loved and cared for and where people spend their evenings and their mornings and their Saturdays, that's top quality food. There's nothing but good energy going into that food. So that's really good. But there's a problem about the schools. Farm to school is a great idea. It's a fabulous idea. And I know that the statewide health improvement program is committed to it and trying really hard to make it flourish. But the problem is that the producers aren't cooperating. So I say to myself, why aren't the producers cooperating? Well, I think they aren't because, number one, if you look at the bottom line, you look at the cold hard facts, you can't make a living. You can work your tail off, but you can't make the bottom line be enough to support yourself and your family, no matter how hard you work on it. So you have to have a day job or another means of income. So you go off and do whatever it takes to make the money that you need to live on, and then your gardening, your food production, has to be secondary. So they have small gardens and they sell small amounts. There's just not enough to deal with this huge market that is the schools. Schools are a huge market, huge. If you think about the number of children who have to be fed at least one meal a day, that's more food than we can presently produce. And the reason we can't produce it is because it's not lucrative enough. I see that building a food community needs to involve a couple of things. It needs to involve, first of all, producers being willing to produce enough to feed the kids. This is big. We need to know who the players are. We need to know who's involved so we can start talking to each other, so we can start planning, so we can start each of us increasing our production. And we need a consciousness raising thing going on so that people will spend the extra dollar to buy the top quality food so that the food producers can afford to raise the food. This is a major change that has to happen. We need a renaissance here. We need people to understand that it's like buying a pair of shoes. If you buy a cheap pair of shoes, you will have a cheap pair of shoes, might even look good. But how long will they last, and what will they do to your feet? Or you can buy a really nice pair of shoes that cost a fair amount of money, but they'll feel good on your feet and they will be good for 10 years. So it's the same with food. If you take in really good quality, high energy food, your medical bills are going to be reduced tremendously, much more than the extra money you're spending on food. In fact, somebody figured out, and they said 3 times. You get 3 times the benefit. So the food community that needs to arise has to consider these factors. How can we make the public aware enough to pay what it costs to raise the food? And then how can we get the producers to trust that if they put the time and energy into increasing their productivity, that they'll be adequately rewarded for it? And that's what I think. There are a few players here. There's actually probably a community of 20 people in southwest Minnesota who really would like to raise food for a living. But the young couple near Lucan figured it out last year, and after spending their year raising very good quality food, doing a CSA, they figured they made about $2 an hour, and they have a family to raise. And this economic environment makes it really difficult if you're making $2 an hour.
I think the farm to schools movement arose while I was sleeping. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I actually don't know the history of it. I've been aware of the program for a few years. And basically, it seems to focus on school food directors, giving them incentive to buy from local people. So if they are open to buying from local people, then they get these machines to make their work easier, to save them time, and so on. I have met a half a dozen food service directors in schools around here who are great people, who are more than open to local people bringing in food, really want to provide fresh and local food for the kids. The problems are that they have a budget crunch always, and so they've had to cut staff. So if you bring in fresh produce that hasn't been trimmed and cleaned up and packaged or minimally processed, I guess it's called, then that has to be done at the school. Potatoes have to be peeled and quartered, or broccoli needs to be trimmed and chopped, and they don't have a person to do it. So there's a need for education of producers as to what is required to make their produce fully acceptable to the school. And there's a need for trust that if they go to the extra work to prepare this, that the schools will buy it. There's a little bit of a standoff, and we need to get past that. So what we have going right now is I'm a conservation supervisor for our county, and we will be doing a Area 5, which is Southwest Minnesota, meeting in Redwood Falls in September, and it will be a political awareness program. So all of the candidates who are running for anything will be there for all of the conservation people to interact with, and we will be serving lunch. So we're going to do a local foods lunch. This is a first. Now I know it isn't up in the cities, but it is for here. So the food service director from the Redwood Falls schools is going to cook it. You know, she'll be the chef, she'll coordinate it all, and now we just have to find local people to produce enough food to feed 85 people on that day. This is a step. I mean, you know, it's like step by step. The local foods catalog, you know, where we list out everybody we can find that produces food, all of the food to school people who are open to it. You were asking about farm to school, weren't you?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's a matter of building confidence. We have to do things to make the local producers confident that they can sell to the schools and get a fair price and not get there and have their stuff rejected or whatever. Because in terms of turning the economy for local food producers, the school is a huge market. And if we would start producing even 20% of the food that is sold at the schools, it would greatly enhance the income of all these local food producers. I mean, it would, if they had, if they knew they had a market, for example, think of the potatoes. Think of the potatoes that a school goes through. I mean, there's mashed potatoes, there's baked potatoes, there's herb potatoes, and of course there's French fries. And every week, if a school has 800 or 1,000 students, every week, think of how many potatoes that is per school. I mean, it's just this huge, that's an acre of potatoes. And it's a lot of money. Whereas now, you raise a few and you take them to farmer's market, you hope to sell them. Suddenly you could sell 800 pounds of potatoes in a week. This is encouraging. Same with tomatoes, pizza sauce, If people had a way to trim and roast their tomatoes and make it into pizza sauce and sold that to the schools would be getting a far superior product, a much fresher product, and that would be considerable, and that would be the value added. So it would be, they'd get twice as much for their tomatoes as they could at the farmer's market. The economics are serious.
You've got a kitchen experiment going to play around with this value-added stuff.
Yes.
Could you tell a bit about that?
Yes. So I have a very small bank. I love to say that I bought the bank, but the truth is, of course, that it's 120 years old and was pretty terribly dilapidated. But my goal is to put a kitchen, a commercial, Department of Health approved kitchen on the main floor where local producers can come and do things like roast the tomatoes and make the pizza sauce, or take broccoli and onions and carrots and pea pods and trim them and put them into packages as stir fry. Or another person who wants to take locally grown, freshly milled grain and make bread. When you do that, when you take your product, your product that you raised yourself and is picked at the prime time, and do these trims and these minimal processing, you can increase your profit quite a bit. And I think that the statistics show that is what we have to do. What we have to do. I think we have to sell to the schools. I think we have to accept the fact that we have to sell to the schools, and we have to do what we have to meet the requirements that the school has to meet. So that means we need an approved kitchen where people can come and do their minimal processing, so that they can then take it to the schools. The schools are happy to receive it, and they get 50% more for their product. Instead of, the canning company in California getting that 50%. In terms of sustainability, this would be a huge shot in the arm for a particular group of people that could really use a little extra money here. This is not top down. This is absolutely bottom up economy building. And that pleases me. Just like I treat the dirt, I like that bottom up stuff.
I was visiting with a producer down by the Iowa border the other day, Bill Brandt.
Yes.
And the thing that was bugging me the whole time was, given the population density out here, where do you get enough market to keep your operation going?
And the schools are there. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, Farm to School has been going for, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 years, and it is still struggling. It is struggling. Most of the schools don't do any Farm to School, and those that do around here in southwest Minnesota, where the big commercial farm is the mode, right? Down here, a school may purchase from 4 or 5 producers, but that's about it. And that isn't, that's small. And so that's why I say we need a renaissance. We need an awakening to the fact that there's this huge market that needs our service. Um, that's the ready market. And the steps are that the producers have to understand good agricultural practices, they have to understand post-harvest handling, they have to understand cool and dry, cool and dry, cool and clean. But it's common sense. And if we just take a little bit of energy and tell the producers exactly what is required, I believe that they could understand that they could meet it. They could meet that. And we might very well have to do some cooperative work. The kitchen that I'm talking about is meant to be a cooperative effort. You present the kitchen and you invite people to come, and we need somebody who caters with local foods. I mean, this would be a huge step if someone were to cater with local foods. So the kitchen would be there. They could come in, they could buy from local people, and they could do, for say, the Chamber of Commerce annual banquet. It would be a win-win-win all the way around situation. But the market is there. It is there in the schools. And I don't think there's anything more important. There's some great saying that I probably won't get right, but it's something about it's easier to build a healthy child than to fix a broken man. And if we could get the kids eating healthy food, again, it's a win-win-win. Everybody wins. And if instead of going home and drinking soda pop and eating chips or whatever kids do when they get home, if they actually wanted a good carrot, this would be a huge step forward.
Uh-huh. And I have a friend at a local nursing home, and she makes the same point about nursing home kitchens.
Yes.
And nursing home food, and so all of these big institutions. Now I know that at some point in your career you've supplied major quantities of garlic to food chains in the cities, and so when we've talked earlier, I've thought about your ideas in connection with, getting good food to the big cities where there's the huge market. Have you given up on that in favor of this kind of local cycle?
I have. I've actually really moved on that point. And accepting the ecology perspective, where you need to consume what is. Just a little while ago, you said to me, ask and it will be provided. And this is how I feel about a lot of things. What you need is immediately at hand. It is already there, immediately at hand. You just have to wise up to be able to see it. And I believe that when it comes to food, that this is a very important point. We need to be part of the community of the soil. We need to eat food raised as close to where we are as possible. This is basic ecology. And it's one of those points that tends to go right over our heads. We like olives, we like bananas, we like oranges, So do I. But the majority of what we eat should be raised locally. And those of us who are fortunate enough to raise food locally, we need to feed our immediate community first. Then if there's some left over, then it goes out to the next ring. But it should start here. It should stay here. We should build healthy bodies here.
That is a move.
Yes.
So what kind of reception have you found for these ideas among the people living around you here?
So when you talk one-on-one with people, if the thoughts that you are presenting are new and foreign, you get strange looks. I mean, it takes several exposures to an alternative concept before it makes sense to a person as a general rule. This is me talking about me here. And I have found in the years I've been here that I have said things. It's like, who was it? Schopenhauer. You know, the first time you present a truth, it is ridiculed. The second time you present it, it meets with violent opposition. And the third time you present it, it is accepted as self-evident. And I think that's how it is with lots of things, you know, maybe, certainly with thoughts. And so when I first came here, for example, I was raising garlic. I came here and I was looking for a crop that I could grow, and I noticed that the native lilies, the little plantains, and the asparagus that grows wild in the ditches, those lilies were doing pretty well. And I thought, I wonder about garlic, because I happen to be a huge lover of garlic. Also, I had planted onions, and onions did very well. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to try the garlic thing. So one fall, I planted a bunch of garlic. And by gum, the next year, I got gorgeous garlic. So then, over the years, I kept building my garlic crop, and I've tended to have really fine crops. So the first few years that I raised garlic, I peddled garlic around here. I peddled garlic. I marketed garlic. I went to restaurants. I went to the farmers markets. I went everywhere I could, and I had a heck of a time. I managed to sell a little bit of garlic, but it took a whole lot of work. Well, now I am at the other end of the spectrum. I cannot raise enough garlic to satisfy the market. Now, I go to the farmer's market, they wipe me out. I go to a different farmer's market, they wipe me out. I go to Garlic Festival, I sell several thousand bulbs in an afternoon. And so, you know, you get people used to the idea they can eat garlic. You can get Swedes and English people to eat garlic. It doesn't happen the first year, but after a while, you do enough garlic tastings, you make roasted garlic butter, people start liking garlic. And I think you can do that with all kinds of good, nutritious food. The place where I don't think we're making much headway is in meat. I don't know, maybe it's because so many health conscious people who take the step to be responsible about what they eat, many of those people go vegetarian. Well, that sort of makes pasture meat not a significant thing. But people around here they're caught in a cycle of raising grain, having grain products fed to the animals, and having then the animals marketed back. And they feel this loyalty to eat the grain-fed meat. It's part of their cycle. It's part of, you know, it's like, why would they buy pasture pork or grass-fed beef when they're raising corn and soybeans? And those corn and soybeans, after they're processed, get fed to the cattle. Well, if you don't buy that product, then you're being disloyal to your own business, sort of. So that's hard to get. That one's hard to sell. I mean, there is some market, and those of us who really believe that it's not smart to eat prisoners, if we're going to eat meat, we will do our best to always have, you know, free-range poultry or grass-fed beef and pasture pork. But that one's a real hard one to convince. The vegetables, the farmers markets are doing better and better. When I started the farmers market in Walnut Grove, there really weren't active farmers markets around. And now, when I was researching for the local food catalog, I found 25 farmers markets in southwest Minnesota. Now, those of you who live in the city may not find that phenomenal that every town has a farmers market, but it's a major change here in the last 5 or 6 years. That means that people are starting to buy from farmers markets, because there's two parts to a farmers market. There's the people bringing the stuff, and they have to be there, And there's the people buying the stuff, and they have to be there. You can't have just one. So if the farmers markets are proliferating, that means the people buying from farmers markets are proliferating. So there is a consciousness coming, particularly in fruits and vegetables.
Is anything happening with restaurants? I mean, it seems like they would be the kind of cutting edge educating places where people would taste something better than they got at home and get inspired to pursue that more often.
It seems that it takes a certain population base to make that work. Marshall has a population, I don't know what the latest census says, but Marshall probably is around 15,000 people now. A few years back, there was a restaurant in Marshall that tried to sell local produce, but it didn't work, and they went back to commercial commodity. Brookings has a really nice restaurant that sells almost exclusively local, and that population supports it, so that's succeeding. I was just talking to the economic development person from Redwood Falls today, and she told me that there is a gentleman who is planning in the next year to put together a restaurant that sells that uses local foods in Redwood Falls, which is a population base of like 6,000 or something. So we'll see how well that goes. Overall, restaurants will not buy from local producers. They have a food service that comes around in the truck, and they can order it and they get what they want, and that's cool. And again, here's the need for the kitchen. You know, we need the minimal processing and the trimming and keeping the waste on the farm, you know, because time is so important to restaurant people. So maybe if they could get the food in a closer to usable form, maybe they would use more local stuff. But, you know, hey, the fact that there's arguably going to be 2 or 3, oh well, there's one in Curry now also that tries to use local foods as much as they can. So it's coming, one step at a time. I don't know when this notion of global economy and food really reached its zenith, but it kind of got stuck here. And so it's partly, I'm sure, because we have huge farms. We have farms that are thousands of acres, and those farms, they raise corn and soybeans. And so, like we said earlier, there's this loyalty to their own production, their own mode. And so they'll buy corn chips, you know, before they'll buy corn on the cob. Or that was so. It's less so now. Now people like corn on the cob again. I'm happy about that.
I just talked to a beef producer who was feeling guilty, but implanted beef just doesn't taste good. They eat their own.
Yeah.
That happens. Also, on this visit, I talked to a restaurant person who said, when the farmers actually come to me with produce, I buy it. But I can't go to them. I don't have time. And of course, farmers don't have time to walk produce around to restaurants either.
No. They might. Producers might have time to go to schools or restaurants, but they don't have time to peddle farm to farm or house to house. I mean, you know, so at one point, I didn't do a CSA, but I did a pick your own vegetables. I thought this is a good way to go. Get people to come out, they can pick their own stuff, that, you know, to cut my time down a little bit, and they could have, you know, people like to choose. They like to pick their own. But I found that people would come out and they'd want 2 tomatoes and a pepper, and they'd be here for an hour. And while that's entertaining, that was like $2.50, and it took an hour of my time. And I don't have that. I mean, I'm 14 hours a day in the field until it gets 90 degrees. And so that was not efficient. But the idea of going house to house and selling $2.50 of produce at each house is not efficient. Yeah, this concept of time is, you know, it's an interesting thing that has developed where no one has time. Everyone has become extremely occupied. You know, this is one of the wonderful luxuries of living in the country is I work off a list instead of a schedule as much as I can. And it gives me a tremendous sense of freedom of time because I choose what I'm doing. I can do my favorite thing first. And if you start with your favorite thing, your attitude stays pretty good. But yeah, this thing about time and schedules and phone calls, the longer I live in the country, the more strange that seems to me. And it's not that a person in the country, or a food producer in particular, spends fewer hours working. We spend many hours working. It's just if you're choosing what you're doing, the stress factor disappears, or at least is greatly reduced.
And it was that stress with not controlling your life that drove everybody to the city.
Exactly. There we go.
So there's stress
Well,
and stress.
Yeah, I came face to face with that shortly after I came back here. That one of the big difference between business people that I had known in this city and farmers wasn't the size of their capital investment or probably not the number of hours they work. It's that the person who works in the city and is a business person, if they fail, everybody knows it's their fault. They failed. Whereas a person who lives in the country does everything they can do, and if they succeed, they say a prayer. And if they fail, they say a prayer. Because they know they're not in control. It's not their fault. I mean, it could be their fault if they screwed everything up. But if they did everything right, it's not their fault. And they don't have to live with guilt. Whereas the guy in the city, if he fails, if she fails, it's their fault.
I suppose this interview is going to work a little bit as a commercial for country life. It has that role just because of who it goes to.
Well, it is a superior way to live.
Well, I was kind of gathering that you thought
I
that
do.
from
do.
your first discourses. Does time hang heavy here, like in the evenings?
Well, I am not a huge advocate of a lot of technology. I really feel it's like way over the mark. On the other hand, I love having the internet, and I love having Netflix, and I love having books. So it doesn't. It doesn't. For one thing, in the summer, so what time is it now? Pushing 9?
About 9:20.
9:20. How fine is this? How fine a life is this? And so the time that weighs heavy is when it is beastly hot in the middle of the day and I have things to do and I can't do them because I just melt. But not in the evenings. The evenings are beautiful and the colors are fabulous and the wind is lovely, the breeze. And I do love a good book. And, you know, I still have a lot of friends who live in faraway places and I love having email and being in touch with them.
So the internet's is a player in making life
It actually
bearable.
it actually is.
a friend working on broadband in Minnesota will be very gratified to hear that.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes, it's hard. It's actually hard to remember life without it. Yeah.
um, I remember remembering back to when I was growing up. There was a lady in community, wife of a pretty prosperous farmer, who was the idea person, and everybody knew she was the idea person. And so what new thing? And she was the person who introduced me to yoga in like 1965 or something. But she was always just full of ideas, and I think she probably had a great life. But I also think that it was remarkable that people didn't name two. She was the idea
She was
person
the idea
in the. Is that the kind of role you've fallen into out here, or are there?
For good or bad. For
Yeah,
good or bad.
yeah.
It isn't. It's a complex thing. But yes, I suspect so.
Uh-huh.
I suspect so.
And how does that feel to you? I mean, do you wish you had more people to play with? Or
Absolutely.
more idea people? More
Absolutely.
cranks out here with weird ideas?
Absolutely.
People who say, well, if you don't sing to your plants, you can't do anything. Or,
Yeah. Well, it was interesting to say that Chuck Reinert is your cousin because he's an idea person. And he was one of the first friends I made when I came back. I'm real fond of him. But there is a tendency toward orthodoxy here. And this is something that I believe is of necessity going to soften. But this notion that there is a way we do things, we are set, and there's a way we do things, and that way is right. And if you don't do things that way, then you're bad. And I'm happy to say that I think that's softening. That's hard on people like me. Yeah.
So, are you getting young farmers, new farmers, people who got tired of the city coming in round about you?
Land Stewardship Project is doing their best on that. They have Farm Beginnings program, and I know several young farmers who have gone through their Farm Beginnings program and have come back. Now, the two that I know both have gone back into their family's operation and are modifying it or doing something adjacent to it or something. So they do have family backing, which is very important.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Land Stewardship is doing a good thing with their Farm Beginnings program. Now my nephew, who farms my farmland and has taken over my brother's operation, he also has, by default, family backing. He got trained, and he didn't go through Farm Beginnings. He's more a conventional farmer. But he's a really good man, and he's a young farmer. The average age of farmers is way too high. I mean, the average farmers around here are not spring chickens anymore. And it is a serious concern who's going to take over the farms, or are they going to consolidate more and go from 2,000 acres to 4,000 acres to 6,000 acres, which I don't think can happen because I think the size of the equipment is going to be prohibitive. This is clay soil. You get any bigger machines and they're going to be mired in the mud. That's my hope, actually, I suppose. But it is a serious concern where we're going to get our young farmers. I have 3 sons, all of whom are outdoor type guys and all of whom dig in the dirt and love to be active with their hands, but none of them want to come and take on my project here, which is kind of sad for me. But they're all, they grew up in Washington State, so they're kind of thinking that that's the perfect place. Whereas I grew up here, so I think this is the perfect place.
You were mentioning before that farmstead, the original farmstead kind of land, like what we're sitting on right here, this
Right.
few acres, is sufficient for pretty substantial vegetable and
Oh.
fruit production and isn't really much good for anything else.
It's too small. I mean, the areas are too small. I mean, it's like, there are these opportunities here. One of which is, so many of these farmsteads have been vacated. They are in disrepair. There aren't enough people who want to live in the country and fight the winter, deal with the winter. Young people have moved to the cities. There's a brain drain, blah, blah, all of this stuff. So whereas when I was a child, there were, I think 8 families within a mile of where I grew up. 8 families. 8 houses, 8 barns, 8 places with 5 to 7 acres right around the buildings that were used for various things having to do with living and raising of the table food. Now there's probably 1 per square mile on the average, 1 family, maybe 2. And all those other houses, that would be 6 houses empty, 6 barns not being used, and 6 places with 5 to 10 acres that are fallow because the space is too small for the big equipment. Perfect opportunity for table food growers. Perfect opportunity for organic orchards, for garlic fields, for potato growers or whatever. Perfect. If we could just find the people who wanted to do it. And they could probably either rent them for very little money. They could probably rent them for $500 a month, no problem. They could probably buy them for a fraction of what the land is worth. This would be a way to provide all that food that we need for the schools. I mean, the pieces are here if we could just get them to connect. But we have to break through that orthodox thinking, and we have to empower the producers to think they could make a living. As it stands right now, they can't make a living, and that will keep everything from happening. So these are steps that need to be taken. But yes, these old farmsteads, they're perfect for doing the kind of production that I think would definitely enhance the health of the people of this community. Definitely.
So I know stuff has changed enough in the last while that it's difficult to predict the future because you get new ideas and things redirect. But what's your guess about what you'll be doing the next 10 years?
This is at least a 20-year project I'm on. And I'm 66. So I figure, if I think of all the people I know who have become, what do you call them, octogenarians or whatever, and the thing they all seem to have in common is they are very active. And the ones who live around here, who live to be 80 or 90, are all hardworking, active. They're outside and they are gardening and they are engaged. So what are the alternatives? I mean, why would one, besides I love what I'm doing. So what to do with the rest of my life? Why not do what I really love to do, especially since I believe that will keep me healthy for the rest of my life. And if I'm lucky, one day I'll just wake up dead. And most of my projects will be in a reasonable state of completion.